We have now come to Hagen in Germany, where we will meet a senior scholar, Ulrike Schultz, who is, among other things, an expert in feminism and gender issues in relation to law. So, welcome, Ulrike Schultz, to this course in Sociology of Law. It's the introductory course to a master program, about sociology of European law. And you represent something called the FernUniversität. Could you start with giving us comments about what you're working with within this university?
Mm-hmm. Let me first say that's a pleasure and an honor for me to be part of your course. And the FernUniversität may offer similar experiences to what you have in your program in Lund, because my university is no proper university. Oh, it is a proper university. Oh, my colleagues would kill me if I say not a proper university. But it's a university which teaches in a different way from other universities. So our students are not at place. They're everywhere in the Federal Republic and everywhere in Europe and around the world. And we send them written course material plus additional media. And of course, these days, a lot is done via internet. This is just about this university. It was founded in '74 and it was a child of its time then. Now, sociology of law. How did I get into sociology of law? Well, I started to study in '66. I'm a rather old lady now. And we had the years of '68 in Germany or all over Europe with the critical students movement. And at that time, it became common in Germany, or the first lectures on sociology of law were offered. And I must tell you, I've hated to study law, the dogmatics. I found it so dry. It had nothing to do with me. It was, well, in Germany we learn law with constructed cases. A does something with B, etc., etc. And so I always tried to learn with what we call side subjects or additional subjects. And one of these was sociology of law, to see what law means in reality or what demands reality has to law. And so this was really like an awakening for me, getting away from these dry dogmatics. And in a sense, it helped me to learn the dogmatics, and I could see the tension between what society needs and what law can offer. And I did other things in addition, like comparison of law. So I know quite a lot about comparative legal systems. And I've also studied English law and French law, and all this fitted very well together with doing sociology of law. And so I studied it quite intensely for a couple of years, till I started to practice. Then it was less important for some time, but it became very important again later on in my life. And I started to offer with colleagues lectures on women and law, and I invited women who became very prominent afterwards, like Jutta Limbach, who became president of our Federal Constitutional Court afterwards, prominent politicians, etc., etc. And when we did the lectures, we discovered that we had entered an open field. We dealt with questions which you could not find in the legal main publications, main press. And so we decided to record the lectures and to produce written court material out of that. And we started in '85. And sociology of law made me think critically about what I was doing then in learning law, gave me critical perspectives, and also gave me perspectives how to think about law and how law should be revised. And so what I did later on about questions of women and law and gender and law was really a consequent development from doing sociology of law beginning in the year 68 and then onwards for a long time.
So the critical perspective brought you both, in a sense, to sociology of law and to a feminist perspective, perhaps, huh?
Yes, yes. I'm a person who always questions what she does, whether it is right what I do, and I always have a critical view of what happens in society, and law regulates society, so I always ask myself, is law all right, or should it be changed? And yes, I started with dealing with general questions, and then later on taking this critical view. Does the law really offer proper regulations for what women's lives need? And then later on opening up the scope to gender questions. When I did my second examination, the qualifying examination, I told my father, okay, could I not set up my office in your practice and take the legal part of your practice? And my father simply said, no, he didn't want to have women around. Now you will understand why I'm fighting for women's rights.
Is that something you also have been striving with to strengthen the position for women in legal education?
Yes, of course. That's on my agenda, without doubt, having dealt that much with the issues of women's rights and does the law fit women's lives, realities and gender questions in law? Of course, it's very important for me to see that law is a subject which suits women to study. Let me explain what I mean. When I started to study law in '66 at the University of Munich, we had 7% of women in the audience amongst the students. We were a really tiny minority, and that meant, for example, when women were raising their voices in the classroom, the men would laugh aloud, hearing these higher pitched voices women have. They would simply laugh because for them it was a signal they can't be as good as us men. We've set the male standard for this subject. And it was a long way to go to be taken seriously in my study, in studying law. For example, when I asked a law professor, after having taken my first degree, could I do a dissertation with you? He said, well, I've heard you want to marry. Please learn cooking. That's more important for you.
And when was that?
That was in 1970. We've gone a long way since, but of course there are always still traditional gender stereotypes in the back of the heads, and particularly in Germany in law faculties. You have to know that in Germany in law faculties we still have less than 10% of women law professors after all these many years, full law professors. In the minor ranks it's a little more. Although now far more than 50% of the students are women. And so there's a discrepancy between who is teaching and who is learning, and what is the style of teaching like. And I want to dig into these questions of the culture of law faculties and how women feel accommodated in the law faculties in my new project, which I'll start right now, which is on women law professors and their careers, the culture of law faculties, and well, involved in that is also my practical experience as an equal opportunities officer at my university. We also want to take a close look and to do all these wonderful regulations we have on equal opportunities and we apply at our universities really help to change the situations, or what are the factors which lead to this change in the universities. And I might still add one point, in the 70s we had some research in Germany that at law faculties women described that they had an alienation process in studying law. Men said too, yeah, there is some kind of alienation process. But for women, it was more important, more tangible. And so I also want to deal with that question because I think there is still something there in that sense.
If you relate a gender perspective on law to a feminist perspective.
Yes, a feminist perspective, in a sense, is biased. Whatever is ism is an ideology, and I still have problems to call myself a feminist lawyer. In the Anglo-American world, it doesn't matter. There it is, well, you're well respected when you call yourself a feminist. In Germany, it has a little difficult taste. Jutta Limbach, who I already mentioned, the former president of our Federal Constitutional Court, was very bold and called herself a feminist lawyer. But my notion of myself was always to be a women's rights lawyer, and then, of course, later on moving on to gender. Yeah, and why is it important to move on to gender? Because, of course, law also has deficits in regard to particular men's issues in life. And so this is why we broadened the perspective, or why it was necessary to broaden the perspective from women to gender, which includes transsexual issues, which includes issues of homosexuals, and which also not only takes women into the focus, but also men and their needs.
When you bring in a gender perspective to law, that I guess requires more of a sociology of law perspective in legal education and legal studies. Do you agree upon that?
Yes, of course. Bringing in the gender perspective is to widen the law from the inside. We were talking about inside and outside a minute ago. And to take society in the focus. What is the effects of legal regulations in society, and does it meet the needs of people who live in this society, or are changes necessary? And of course, the living together of men and women has changed so dramatically in these past 30 years. If I compare my life to my mother's life, it's so different. And so this means we have to do a lot of reflection on the points, how should we change the law, what are the effects? And also, of course, we have to theorize, because the theory gives us an evaluation of what we do.
A gender perspective is broader than a feminist perspective, isn't it?
Yes, sure. As I said, the feminist perspective is in a sense biased. And that was very, very important for a long time, because women had faced so many drawbacks in the society and much of oppression and suppression. And so I really think it was very important to work with the feminist perspective, and it still is. But of course, we do not only have women as sexualized or sexual beings, we also have men, and we have people with different sexual orientations. And with the women's rights focus, we had dealt with these questions concerning women. Of course, we had the methodological tools to also deal with the questions of all of men concerning their gendered life, and also with all these others who live different styles of life. And so I think it was consequent to open up the focus, and it was also a necessity.
I think we shall turn a bit to your research and your interest in in women's issues in relation to law. You have, for instance, studies women in legal professions, and you have some texts about that, and you have dealt with it for a long time, as far as I know. What would be the most striking results? I know we can then split it up into certain sub-themes, but what would you say in general?
Okay. Why have I specialized on the legal profession? Well, in a sense, it was consequent to do it because if you are in didactics, you think about how to prepare people for practice. Another point for myself was I'd always wanted to become a practitioner, a Anwalt, a Rechtsanwalt. And so I found it very thrilling to research into people who practice. This is how I took an interest in it. And I joined a big comparative project on lawyers in society in the year 1980. So I've been working in the field for a very long time. That project was done by Rick Abel and Philip Lewis and resulted in 3 big volumes, Lawyers in Society. And I have written the report on the legal profession in Germany. And when we discussed our reports, I discovered that the point of women in the legal profession was sort of left out. And so, well, there was a tiny little bit, a small paragraph in these reports. And so I thought, well, this is a field you have to plunge into and to deal with it in depth and detail. And so, well, it took a couple of years till we got going, but then we built a very strong international group working on women in the legal profession and resulting in several major publications. And there was one big publication on women in the world's legal profession, a big volume with 30 contributions on women in so and so many countries and their situation in the legal profession. And I'm working together with Gisela Shaw, my co-editor, on a comparable book on gender and judging, and we've edited special issues of journals on these questions. We finally got more women studying law and slowly and gradually more women practicing. And this is why we still have a far lower percentage of women in legal practice than men. As I told you, when I started to study, we had 7% of women, and when I joined my university, there was one woman law professor at the time in Germany, so that was no role model for me to become a law professor. There were no role models there. And at that time we had like 2% of women practicing as lawyers, and in the judiciary it was like 4%, so sort of non-existent. The picture, of course, has changed in the 80s and 90s, and meanwhile many women are qualified, and actually the judiciary in Germany is taking in more women now than men. It's like 55% women and 45% of men, but it takes time for them to climb through the grades. And 2 years ago I've done a big research for the Ministry of Justice of our federal state, North Rhine-Westphalia, which was called Women in Leading the Positions of the Judiciary. Well, and we've done it because there were sort of no women in leading positions. And the question was to find out, well, is it a question of a trickle-up effect? Will the women who start to come in at the bottom move up to the higher ranks gradually, or are there factors which keep them out of the leading positions, proper career impediments? And there are several answers to it. Of course, there are the classical things, a male field and a minority entering majority dominated field. And of course there is an irritation or effects of well, what are these people, these other people coming to our field? What do we do with them? Are they really like us, and will they really work the way we do? That's very important, and that's always been the critical view on women. Will they keep the field as it is, or will they change the field? That was one point. And the other point, of course, is the family duties women still have. And Germany, like all the German-speaking countries, is a country with a very strong tradition of a male breadwinner model, that if they're well-educated women, well, they may work. And in the judiciary, it's so easy to work part-time. And so you have a wonderful reconciliation of your good skills you have acquired and your work. But a career is really difficult then to take, because you have these competing life aims. So
this concept of leaky pipeline.
Yes.
Isn't that one of the...
Yes, sure. The leaky pipeline. One point is, and that was what the people in the judiciary, the court presidents always told me. They said, women don't want to have a career. They feel so well here. We offer them any way of combining family and work. And I said, do you offer it in the same way to the young men you have here? And what about women who do not want to get children, or women who do have children but have a strong career orientation? Because I've done interviews with these women. I said, oh, well, you are high potentials. What about your career? And they said, well, as soon as a child, the court president told me, we'll find a nice position for you. But then I was out of the focus of someone who wanted to have a career. And just to give you an idea about the numbers we have, most judges we have are in the civil courts. We have the civil and criminal courts, which makes the ordinary jurisdiction. Then we have labor courts, social courts, administrative courts, tax courts. But the bulk of the judges is in the ordinary jurisdiction. And there with the court presidents, in my federal state, we have 18 court presidents of the first level, first instance courts. And when I did the interviews, it was 17 men and 1 woman. And that shows you easily that there is a problem. And the problem still is that with the otherness. When we started our research on women in the legal profession in this big international group, our leading question was, will women change the legal profession, or will the women legal profession or legal work change women? And what
did you find out?
Yeah.
Have it changed the profession?
It's very difficult to answer, to give a clear answer, because of course there are many factors in society leading to change. But a lot of change has happened. The legal profession is less monolithic, it's more colorful. Women have brought a lot of color to the professions. When I went to lawyers' meetings in the 80s, it was all men dressed in black or blue suits. No, so the picture has changed completely. And I think also the style of communication, how people deal with each other, has changed. But on the other hand, what we have to keep in mind is, if you enter a field, there's a strong adaptation process, that you try to become one of them, to be part of the field, to be like them. And this is why I think that there is still more potential for more change with these younger generation of women coming now, because the older generation really tried desperately to be as tough, as strong as all these males in the field. And this older generation of women is also a problem for the younger ones, because they say, oh, these younger ones, they are complaining and they want to have it the easy way when we've done it the strong way, and they should be as strong as us. And so I think that, there will still happen more things. And I think also the move from the dogmatic system to a more open system where soft skills matters has also something to do with the women entering the profession. But it's not a monocausal development. There are other factors coming into the picture too.
You said something about the profession affecting women. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. That's the point about the adaptation process. And, well, there are effects which I would call effects of modernity, overall effects. For example, that women's voices have changed. That was so amazing to see for me. As you know, I'm also a trained mediator, and I do trainings in communication, negotiation, mediation for lawyers and the judiciary, and this has made me study voices too. And these days, women talk with deeper voices, which for me is part of this adaptation process. Then the attire, how women present themselves. That's a very thrilling story too. In the 90s, it was all suits for professional women. That was also part of the adaptation process. And if you see the fashion these days, if you go out, just a couple of years ago, like 2, 3, 4 years ago, women rediscovered dresses. And this is not just fashion. This is what happens in society, how you feel about yourself, how you picture yourself. So this is a rollback to feeling more feminine, having less of an obligation to adapt to a mode which has been formed, a traditional mode, but adding something else to the picture. So I think these are very important things we have to keep in mind. And I find it so thrilling to continue all these developments. This is why I say I would like to become very, very old to see more of this development, and then would give me a better chance to give a kind of final judgment and on theorizing what's happening there.
Do women judges judge better than men, or do they judge at least in another way? Could you have you any experience or studies about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that was one of the leading questions of our research. Do women change the profession? If you look at the judiciary, it would mean, do women judge in a different way? And we've been going around trying to collect evidence in many countries of the world. So what were the results? Well, what you bring into your practice as a judge is your life reality. You are an individual. You're supposed to be objective, to meet an ideal of the detached objective judge, but still you are the individual. And so life reality plays a role. And for women, life reality often still differs quite a lot from the reality of their male colleagues. And so what we've seen is that women bring in other views, of course, into classical women's questions, dealing with violence, dealing with the sexual violence, dealing with the family law questions, but it may also deal with the questions of social law. I have a very funny story here. When I went to do my interviews at our state social court, I asked my interview partners in the end, could you tell me a little, do women change the way sentences are made? Do they come to other results? And they said, oh, honestly, not. Women are like men. We have this idea, the law is applied. But in the end, we need an interpretation. And then all my interview partners at that court said, okay, yes, we have one issue where it's just mattered. And that issue was that people, men, had asked, can we get our sickness insurance to cover the cost of Viagra? And then women and men had to decide on these cases, and they said they were completely opposed on whether they wanted to give it or not. Well, you may have a guess in what way they did it. Well, this is a funny story, but of course we have other evidence too. One very interesting result is that in family law questions, if women meet a judge when they want to get alimony, and they meet a female judge, that female judge may be more strict to the women, and they may be more successful in get more alimony if there is a male judge. For me, the explanation is the female judge is a working woman, and she thinks, well, I have to make money for myself, so why is she asking alimony? And so they may have a stricter view, and we have evidence on that from many countries of the world that it happens there. And if I confront judges with this evidence, they say, oh yes, there's something in that sense. And of course, also considering questions in criminal law, these questions of sexual violence, there women may adopt a different view from men. But you know, in the end, it's an individual sitting there, an individual in the system. So you cannot predict what is happening. And the same point is, do we include, what do we do to include other minority groups from society to represent these groups? And will they also represent their interests? In the end, it's the system. They have to represent the system, but of course they can add the views. And it does play a role, for example, if we come to the judicature of the constitutional courts, not only our German constitutional court. I've just read a contribution by a colleague about the South African constitutional court, and there the issue, of course, was to integrate blacks and to integrate women, black women. And so what issues have been important for them, and have they brought in other views? In Germany, it was a little difficult to analyze, but of course, if it comes to questions like abortion, women may have another view than men. But always, you never can predict, because there's the individual, there's the system, and there are these adaptation processes. And, well, I think a tendency is that women in this legal profession are still more conservative than women in other fields.
At least the implication of what you say is that you can't fully understand legal decision making without, let's say, taking these other factors, these external factors into account. It's not only a question about interpretation of black letter law according to legal sources, is that?
Right. Well, we have the black letter law, and that's where we start. And there we indeed have the differences between the common law system and the civil law system. Germany is a civil law system. In the common law systems, there's much more discretion for the judge, and the individual personality matters. So in common law systems, you will always know who was the judge who's passed a sentence. In the civil law system in Germany, it is the court, and the judge is just a kind of anonymous representative of the system. You don't know, was it a man or a woman? You have to go make interviews to know whether it was a man or a woman, or if you have been observing cases, of course, at court, of course.
What you also have said in relation to women, in relation to legal profession, is that it seems to be a situation where women specialize in certain cases like family issues, ethnic problems, and so on and so forth, while men still keep the positions within ordinary courts. Is that something still valid?
Yeah, in a sense, yes. Yeah, there's always a push and pull factor. Where do you find women in the system? Do women specialize in the classical subjects? And is it because they choose it, or are they driven there? And well, the easiest way to describe this kind of choice is to take a look at the statistics of the specialized lawyers. In Germany, if you want to have a specialist title on your nameplate, you have to take courses and take an examination to be entitled to have this title of specialist lawyer. Meanwhile, we have like 20 titles. And so if you take the title of family law, specialized in family law, more than 50% of women have this specialist title. If you go to tax law, it's below 10%. Social law, again, is something which quite a good proportion of women chooses. Administrative law, fewer women. So there is a clear pattern of what women prefer to do. Although, if I go and teach young women now, I offer a course on well, how should I apply, and on career planning. It's basically a course on career planning. And just a couple of weeks ago, I've done this course at the University of Münster. And there I discovered that the young women, and that I have known for a long time, do a lot to enrich their academic capital, even more than men, to add this and that and that. That's one point. And that many of them are specializing now in the fields which were the classical male fields: patent law, competition law, tax law. I had women doing this. But the question is, they qualify in that, but will they stick to the subject? That is the point of the pull factor. Then when they are in practice, will people rather want the woman to give advice to them on family law issues? Or will they discover afterwards, that's very important to me? When I started my life in practice or at university, I'd always said, I don't want to specialize in family law. My few female colleagues, they're all specialized in family law. And I wanted to be strong in company law, in all these issues, to become a highly qualified international lawyer at some time of my career. But then the demands put onto me from the outside were that people wanted me to be knowledgeable on the classical fields for women's issues. And this is why these days I know a lot about family law, and for example also on European law, and mainly there on the questions of anti-discrimination law and equal opportunities regulations.
Interesting. Okay, we have talked a bit about the influence of women on the profession and perhaps on the legal system as such also. Could you mention phenomena, let's say what's regarded as crime today, how that has been influenced by an increased gender awareness in society?
Okay, a change in the lifestyle, of course, will also change crime patterns. But if you... Oh, sorry, that's mine. Hallo, wir brauchen noch Zeit. Ach so, das heißt, du müsstest runterkommen. Den hatte ich dir doch geschickt, den Einstellungsantrag zum Ausfüllen. Dann sag mal Anja, sie soll das fertig machen mit dir zusammen. Ach so, die Aufgabenbeschreibung und so. Ja, Ja, da muss die Aufgabenbeschreibung rein. Jo, ja, das können wir ja dann auch morgen machen oder so oder wie auch immer. Oder wenn ich später, wir fahren später sowieso noch auf. Jo. Ja, okay. Nee, dann würde ich es ihr gerne geben. Okay, dann bringst du es ausgefüllt mit. Die auf. Ach so, ja. Und dann unterschreibe ich und oder Harald unterschreibt. Ja. Ja, wunderbar. Alles klar sonst? Ja, prima. Bis dann. Tschö. Awareness of crimes has changed, and of other norms too, also considering custody over children and the tasks of men and women in their families. Sure, there is a change. But what I always say, the biggest change we've had in Germany, considering the influence of all the discussions on women's rights and gender and law, was on the lawmaking process. The law has changed so much. And so it was women in parliament, backed up by the women knowledgeable in questions of women and law and gender and law, who've brought about a lot of change. And that's really tremendous. What has happened there. And there I feel really to be an active part of the movement with my project on women's rights, women and law, which I started in '85. That created a very vivid discussion process. Of course, at other points people were discussing too, but that helped a lot to take issues to the fore, to get opinions on issues, to make women discuss on it, to make women discuss with men on it, and take it to parliament and bring about legal change.
We have a research project in my department in Lund about what we call cyber norms, about how IT and the new technology, ICT technology, affects norms and the legal system. If we relate that to the topic we have been discussed here, the relation between men and women, gender aspects and feminist perspectives, what would be your view on that? Is it something which will help us develop still further? Or, I mean, we have this with phenomenon with the social media, for instance.
Right. This is very difficult to answer. Well, all this, what we have to do with the cyber sphere, means that people are detached from their real self and real life. I just read an article which said in the future the main task we are going to have is to make people open the door and go out of the house, not staying inside the house sitting at the computer. So this is one point, and maybe women are more aware of that you shouldn't be detached of your real self and of practical life. Well, still 10 years ago we have discussed, is there a difference in the possibilities of access to the new media? But the statistics show that the participation of women is about the same. Well, and then on the other hand, of course, all this involving law and cyberspace is space matters a lot now, because the cyberspace is above or beyond the national state. And so what about national norms in this cybersphere? Which law has to be applied? Should there be a world regime? But do all countries or nations join in this world regime? And where's the judge who applies this? So these are very difficult questions. And about the gender issue, a little difficult to answer. Maybe you have another idea of it.
Most people refer to globalization in relation to this phenomenon, which I regard as a partial phenomenon. I mean, there are much more into it. But of course, globalization is a phenomenon which is linked to this, and I don't know if there are any gender aspects on that.
Yes, of course. their gender aspects. Globalization and also the process of Europeanization is driven by the economy. And so the question is, do aspects of sustainability play a role? In how far do ecological questions play a role? And in the traditional women's movement, these questions were attributed to women, or women rather said, it seems that we feel more in charge of these questions than men. There is this classical issue behind it. Well, men being the breadwinners have always had a closer look at how do I make money, and money may not have mattered as much for women. This maybe has caused that they have a closer connection to these points. But yeah, it's always so difficult to give a really clear answer. Does gender matter in this and that point? But it's an asset to ask the questions, because it opens your view, even if in the end you say, I cannot say that gender has mattered, but you have added more perspectives to your thinking and to your evaluation of the issue.
Would it be possible that one reason for holding women back in relation to career could be the competition between male and female, or man and woman?
Yes, of course, there's a strong competition. If you go back to the old arguments why women kept out of the legal profession and only admitted in the 20th century, only left in men, then you will find three arguments. One is competition. Well, the first was, and I just want to mention it because it's so interesting, the first one was that women are too emotional and that they are not objective and neutral, and therefore the outcome of what they're going to do is not clear. The second was that they are too precious for this hard work, and these beautiful women should be kept in the house for the men. And the third, and I think that was all the time the most important argument, was that about competition, because all through history it seems that there have always been too many lawyers for the field, and so we have an article from the 20s which mentions that women are unwanted competitors in the field because men already have the problem to make a living out of their legal occupations.
Thank you. I think we have enough stuff now for clipping 45 minutes. So
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I hope I made myself clear enough. I could have given
think
more
you have
examples.
done yourself very clear.